Here's a fact. Women are underrepresented in financial economic research. Why does that matter?
It's a missed opportunity.
We've got to create the opportunities for everyone.
If it's extra masculine that discourage younger women from entering.
If you only have men essentially coming up with ideas, then there's a lack of diversity in topics.
Economics, for all its mathematical precision, is a social science. And when we look at the representation in economics compared to other social sciences, we're woefully behind.
You miss out if there's talent that's not coming into the profession.
If female underrepresentation has to do with preferences, fine. You can choose a career doing whatever you want. However, if this underrepresentation is due to obstacles, these obstacles need to be studied, understood, and finally addressed.
I always think it's funny that the universities try to get more women to come and study finance, and basically the way I say is, well, we're trying to get women to come and listen to the ideas of men.
Wherever a man gather, ideas flow.
So, the question of this paper was essentially, how do people feel about being in finance? So the authors did a survey to measure job satisfaction, sent out to all the members of the AFA.
So what we found is women are less satisfied in the field of finance than men. We looked at three main explanations. So the first one is preferences, which is a standard story. So people always argue, well, women maybe they shy away from competition, right? And so maybe they don't want to advance in the field, for example, or they're risk averse. And so maybe they don't, that could explain their worse experiences. We looked at carers' responsibilities, and we also looked at experiences of discrimination. And so we found that preferences had very little explanatory power for the lower job satisfaction of women. We found carers' responsibilities had a little bit of explanatory power, but the most important factor was experiences of discrimination. And so women who either experience or witness discrimination, that component really explained a lot of the difference between men and women in terms of job satisfaction.
One common question is, do role models actually matter?
One of the things that came to the surface was the lack of female representation in certain majors, STEM majors in particular. And one of the things we find when we look at that is that women who take courses from other women, especially in STEM fields, we find that it increases the likelihood that they subsequently engage. Now, it's not a uniform finding. There are some fields, like economics, where it doesn't seem to have a big impact. But we do find a pattern where there seems to be something about having that same gender as your initial instructor, helping you to think about or visualize yourself in the field. To get at this empirically, it's difficult. And part of this is an endogeneity problem that a female student who's highly interested in a specific topic might be more likely to choose a female instructor. And so you have to find a way to control for that endogeneity. What we decided to do in the end was to use an instrumental variable strategy. And in our particular instrumental variable strategy, we could observe how many females were serving in a department over time. And we could identify when changes in that happen. I think there is a mechanism that the paper identifies, that there is this role model effect. The first person that they really interact with in the field matters.
What we wanted to see is how visible is women's work at a prestigious conference, NBER's flagship Summer Institute. My co-author, Paul Goldsmith-Pinkham, we realized we'd both been working on the same data for the same year. We decided to join forces and then proceeded to download the data for the NBER Summer Institute for, from 2004 onwards. And at this point, we have about more than 15 years worth of data. We realized that, this is a treasure trove of data. This data was incredibly rich and provided a very unique lens to look at the representation of women. We find that the representation overall pretty steadily hovered around 20%. We find that applied microfields have the highest representation, ranging from about 25 to 30% of female authors represented on the program. Those numbers are much lower for macro at about 16%, and finance is even lower at about 14.5%.
Relative to their share of the membership, women submit less papers to the conference.
So we wanted to know things like how many women are there relative to men? How are women being promoted relative to men after you control for things like productivity, citations, kind of all of the things that you would want to control for. The main finding is there's a gender gap. The gender gap that we see in STEM and economics, it also exists in finance. Finance, the representation is lower than in the rest of economics, so that's kind of observation number one, even after controlling for productivity. Number two is this productivity gap. When we look at the co-author networks of women, they tend to be more female. So women have fewer publications, fewer co-authors than their male counterparts, but actually more female co-authors than their male counterparts, both in number and kind of fraction of all co-authors. And so in a world in which only 16% of faculty are women, that suggests some constraints.
Co-authoring is very common, and when people read and evaluate these papers, there's a gendered bias in assessing who contributed the most value to the paper.
Women tend to give, assume more that women gave the more higher contribution, while men assume more that men gave the higher contribution.
Historically, hiring and promoting have been done mainly by male-dominated boards, and this might explain why
women get severely punished for co-authorships. And if you look at the probability of getting a tenure given a certain set of publications, if it's solo authored, men and women, there's no difference. The same publication, same chance of getting tenure. If you're a man and you have co-authored papers, you still have that same probability. But if you're a woman and you have co-authored papers, you have a much lower probability.
Another important question is whether the editorial process is gender biased.
Is it the case that male referees compared to female referees evaluate differently papers submitted by male authors versus female authors? It turns out the answer is actually precise zero or null.
We don't find any gender differences. We also find no gender differences on the editors. So conditional on receiving the reports, editors are completely gender neutral.
So that kind of seems encouraging. A third result, though, suggests that the female authors may face a higher bar.
We find that female authored papers receive roughly 25% more cites.
What that would mean is basically in order to get an R&R referral recommendation, papers by all female authors need to be a little bit better, which means they're held to a higher bar.
Anecdotally, female teachers receive worse teacher evaluations than men. So, what happens in an experiment where you randomly assign students to either female or male teachers, where everything else is equal, and you've checked for quality?
So we show that female teachers get much worse teaching evaluations compared to their male colleagues. And for example, when we compare male students and female students, we find that basically all the effect, or all the differences, all the gender difference in teaching evaluations basically comes from male students.
Students were randomly assigned to teachers, which means that talent was equally distributed in each group. The same exam was given to all groups and was externally graded. If the quality of the teachers differs, the grades should differ, and they didn't.
So for example, when we make decisions, which teacher do we want to nominate for the teaching award, and make a ranking of the teaching evaluations, these differences will matter, at least on the margin, and likewise for example, for promotion decisions, for hiring decisions at other universities, tenure decisions, these kind of things.
To be fair, a lot has been done when it comes to gender equality in financial economics. Some of the policies have worked very well, and some have backfired.
So in our study, we look at the effects of gender-neutral tenure clock stopping policies. Essentially, the goal of these policies is to reduce the cost of having children.
Having a child puts quite a big dent in your level of productivity, which is of course important to get tenure. The clock stop policy is gender neutral by design, but as it turns out, not in outcome.
These policies may inherently be unequal. Birth mothers are exclusively the ones who are pregnant, who go through the physical and other costs of labor and recovery from childbirth. If the parents choose to breastfeed, but the birth mother is the one who is breastfeeding and bears all of those costs regardless of how the actual child care after the birth of the child is split. Having a child is not completely random. You know, the policies at your university may be somewhat endogenous to the demands of faculty at those universities. So in this paper, we're leveraging the introduction of new tenure clock stopping policies at the university level that are arguably exogenous to the condition of the economics department in particular. Men who are exposed, who are hired when a tenure clock stopping policy is available, are considerably more likely to get tenure at that first university they work at, whereas women are considerably less likely to get tenure in that first job. So men are much more likely to publish in top 5 economics journals when these policies are available, whereas we don't see any differences in the publication outcomes for women.
This also suggests that women aren't able to or willing to use this time as strategically. A group of assistant professors were randomly chosen to either enter a mentoring program or not. So what were the results for those who entered the mentoring program?
So the question that we tried to address was whether kind of a concentrated dose of mentoring could be helpful for junior women faculty in economics. The intermediate findings were encouraging in that people tended to have more publications, they had more grants, and an important thing was that they tended to have one more publication in a top journal. We also saw that there was an effect on the probability that women would get tenure, and that it seemed like they were getting tenure in better places on average.
So my paper was looking at how women and men are described differently on this online professional forum called Econ Job Market Rumors Forum. So a few years ago, that was before my senior year in college, I was looking for a topic basically just for my thesis. So during that time, there was a pretty significant incident that happened where two younger female economists were kind of attacked personally on the forum. First thing I did was to scrape the forum. I basically downloaded all the posts from the forum and basically classify them into, are they talking about a female versus a male?
Looking at all the words, it became clear that women were described in negative terms as opposed to men.
Posts about women are much more focusing on personal related topics, including family, children, physical appearance, versus for men is significantly more about professional characteristics. So you can see in the dynamics, like when they talk about women or minority, they often go very quickly into this affirmative action or whether they have advantage because of their background rather than their professional side. But for men, they tend to really stay on track of the professional discussion.
So our paper is trying to document how systematically different the treatment is between female and male when they present in academic seminars.
Seminars are where you advertise your work. It's where you get feedback. It's also where
the rough and tumble happens. That's where research gets hashed out, and that's where we decide who the profession's winners and losers are.
The co-authors had noticed, independently of each other, that there was a gender difference in seminars. Women and men seemed to be treated differently. This was anecdotal, so they got together to collect some hard facts.
We find that women are interrupted more often than men.
Women are asked 12% more questions than men during a typical economics seminar. They're asked more patronizing and hostile questions.
More is likely bad when there's more of the type of question that are very demeaning or would make the speaker lose their confidence or would make the audience start distrusting the speaker.
How do you make your name in the field? You stand up, you beat your chest, you bellow. Take every opportunity to let the audience know that you're smarter than the other person. We should take ideas seriously, we should battle about them. But being a dick is not a necessary condition for trying to discover truth.
We can have a courteous and polite environment where if we have strong doubts about someone's work, we can wait until the seminar is over. We don't have to be hostile on the spot.
Over the past 30 years since I've been in the profession, there's tremendous improvement. But at the time, time seems to be going by very slowly sometimes. So you have to take a long perspective. You have to be very persistent. You have to keep advocating for women. And it's not a job that just gets done and stays done. It's something that you have to keep working on.